Hi everyone.
Hello. In our two prior segments, we were looking through, in some detail, the first 11 verses of Revelation chapter 1. We got to a voice saying, write what you see in a book and send it to the 7 churches. But already we'd had, before that voice was heard, 5 no's, and this is the 6th in verse 11. The 5 no's were there's no Jehovah, no governing body, no second tier Christianity, i.e. all priests are a kingdom of priests. Every Christian is part of that group. There's no second priesthood within the priesthood. And who gets the glory? The word glory is only used in this segment once.
And it's Jesus that gets the glory.
To him be the glory and dominion forever. So there's no Jehovah's Witnesses then. We are Christ's witnesses if he is the one we are to glorify. And then 5th, in verse 7, every eye will see him. So
no invisible presence.
That seems pretty clear. And then by the time you get to verse 11, send it, this thing you're going to write down, John, to the 7 churches. And you find out in the next chapter it's being sent through the angel of each of those 7 churches, who most commentators think of as an individual
representative,
serving as a kind of a secretary in modern parlance of communication. So all the way through the descent of the message from God through Christ, through the angel, through John, to the angel of each of the 7 churches, it's all individuals. There's no body of elders mentioned. So that's the 6th no here.
The message is going directly to the congregation, not being, to the elders, and then if they feel like telling you something.
Yeah, and if you're a Jehovah's Witness, you know that's the way it normally is. You don't get a lot of letters from the governing body. If you're a Jehovah's Witness, you do get them periodically. But most communication is sent to the elders. And that's part of the stratification of the Watchtower, the pyramid power structure that is an earmark of the cults. So we wanted to read the rest of this chapter. We'll walk back a little bit to verse 10, where John is suddenly attracted to another new voice that he hasn't apparently heard before. So we can read from verses 10 to 20 in the New World Translation first.
Okay. By inspiration I came to be in the Lord's day, and I heard behind me a strong voice, like that of a trumpet, saying, What you see, write in a scroll, and send it to the 7 congregations, in Ephesus, and in Smyrna, and in Pergamum, and in Thyatira, and in Sardis, and in Philadelphia, and Laodicea. And I turned to see the voice that was speaking with me, and having turned, I saw 7 golden lampstands, and in the midst of the lampstands, someone like a son of man, clothed with a garment that reached down to the feet, and girded at the breasts with a golden girdle. Moreover, his head and his hair were white as wool, as snow, and his eyes as a fiery flame, and his feet were like fine copper, when glowing in a furnace, and his voice was as the sound of many waters. And he had in his right hand 7 stars, and out of his mouth a sharp, long, 2-edged sword was protruding, and his countenance was as the sun when it shines in its power. And when I saw him, I fell as dead at his feet. And he laid his right hand upon me and said, Do not be fearful. I am the first and the last, and the living one. And I became dead. But look, I am living forever and ever. And I have the keys of death and of Hades. Therefore write down the things you saw, and the things that are, and the things that will take place after these. As for the sacred secret of the 7 stars that you saw upon my right hand, and of the 7 golden lampstands, The 7 stars mean the angels of the 7 congregations, and the 7 lampstands mean 7 congregations.
So if you're a Jehovah's Witness, is there any doubt in your mind as to who is being described here? I think that even if you guessed, it's given away by the self-identification of this glorious one that John sees. And we should note that this is the first time any of the apostles have seen Christ in his glory this way. Even Paul on the Damascus Road did not see what John sees here. Although he was struck down by the glory, he had to ask, who are you, Lord? And the Lord self-identifies, I am Jesus, whom you are persecuting.
And even after he dies and he comes to the apostles in the closed room and that, he's not described this way. Not this kind of glory.
And when he ascends to heaven in Acts chapter 1, or in the latter part of any of the Gospels, you don't get the impression it's a glorified Jesus like this. But what gives it away here is not that he uses the name I am Jesus. His only self-identification is in verse
18, I became dead.
Well, just before that, though.
Okay. Well, he says, I am the first and the last, the living one, and I became dead.
So when we read in verse 13, someone like a son of man, we might think right away of Daniel 7, and he knew who it was.
Yeah.
There's no indication he knows. I mean, how would you know? How would you recognize your Jesus here when he's described this way, that his eyes were like a flame of fire?
But it tells you he's still a man.
Yeah.
So that is something that a witness thinks as soon as he goes back, he becomes an angel, he becomes Michael again.
A spirit being.
Yeah, but here he's still identified as someone like a son of man. Although he's glorious here, he's still identifiable as a man.
Now that's something the church has taught from the beginning. I don't think Jehovah's Witnesses are aware of that when they dialogue with Christians. The church has always taught, although it's not, has to be fair, it's not always been understood by Christians. They kind of have a Jesus kind of like the one of the Watchtower that became something else when he died and was resurrected. But no, the church officially has always taught that Jesus has human identity and it's permanent.
Yeah.
He took it with him.
A glorified body, but a body.
And therefore will return, and every eye will see him. But this description of a man who's not only got eyes burning with flame of fire, but has a sharp two-edged sword coming out of his mouth. So, of course, how would John recognize him? Even the voice is different, right? What does it say about his voice? A voice as of many waters, a roar of many waters. So, no, you're not going to recognize that Jesus. But when he says, I am the first and the last, even there, when a Jew hears, I am the first and the last, what does he think? He's not thinking of a human being. This is the self-description of Yahweh, Jehovah himself in Isaiah. I am the first and the last, and in the New Testament, the Greek version of that is I am the Alpha and the Omega.
Right.
So at the very least, we witnesses have to concede here is that those people with whom we often disagree about who Jesus is and who Jehovah is, they have a reason for believing what they believe.
And it's all strung together. So it's witnesses will try and divide things, and well, this is Jehovah and this is Jesus, but I mean, it's all strung together. I am the first and the last, and the living one, and I became dead. So you can't separate these things. It's all strung together. So
the paradox of Christ's identity now that he's glorified, he is both human and divine. In some sense, even the Watchtower acknowledges that by saying he is a God, but that's of course for another video. What does John mean by that in the Gospel of John? Well, suffice it to say here that Christ is the central character of the book of Revelation. So that's even given away in the first verse, which we didn't spend a lot of time on, but in the ESV it's not rendered as it is in the New World Translation. What does it say in the New World Translation of verse 1? The very first sentence.
A revelation by Jesus Christ, which God gave him, is the way they render it.
Now what do most modern Bibles do with that, even the King James?
Yeah, we looked up several, and it was of. a revelation of Jesus Christ.
Or the revelation. The revelation of Jesus Christ. And the ESV and the NIV, along with the King James and many others, translate it that way. So the ambiguity of the Greek preposition, it can be rendered by, as in from, through, but it also can be rendered of, as in source, as in the subject of the following.
And if when you look at the whole book, the subject is Jesus.
Yeah.
All the way through, it keeps identifying him in different phrases, but it identifies him.
So if he's the subject of the book, that would explain why, if you do an actual list of the number of titles and names applied to Jesus in this book, it's something like 26 different titles and names, 10 of which are right in this chapter, including the first and the last, of course, the living one. So if these are titles, again, we're back to, oftentimes, surprise, surprise, if you're a Jehovah's Witness, you don't realize that although you take for granted that Jehovah is everywhere in your Bible, he's not here at all. And even when he is here, it's in a circumlocution. For instance, in verse 8, the one who is and who was and who is to come, the Almighty. That's not what you want to see if you're a Jehovah's Witness. They're doing the normal Jewish thing of putting in a substitute for the divine name.
Yeah, they've stuck Jehovah in there.
But what you can't escape, even in the New World Translation, is the name Jehovah is only put in a few times in the book. All illegitimate, because it's not really there in the Greek. And yet the names of Jesus, 26 different ones, are everywhere.
I also thought it's interesting in verse 18, after he identifies himself, then it says, I have the keys of death and of Hades. It's like he's in charge of life and death.
Yeah.
Well, even that probably would be, I would think that would be a difficulty for Jehovah's Witnesses.
Well, they just say that this authority was given to him by Jehovah, but there's no indication of that here. And even where there is indication of the relationship between God the Father and Jesus Christ, as in verse 1, look who comes first. The revelation of Jesus Christ, which God gave him.
Right.
So the first name in the book is Jesus Christ, and throughout the book, the first name is, like I said before, the titles of Christ. But the
emphasis is Jesus.
The big surprise, though, is that there's one name in this book that stands head and shoulders above all the other names or titles of Christ, and it's not maybe one of the main ones you find in the rest of the New Testament. So later on, I suppose we'll leave that for now, as the subject comes up manifestly in chapter 5 when we're introduced to a certain character in the vision itself. But we'll get to that after we do the 7 churches. I found this such a rich study, as you did when we did it almost 30 years ago, because it dismantles your view of the function of church. What is church about, and how realistically, how pure does it have to be before it's a church of Jesus Christ? Because the big thing that hit me from these verses is, who is the one who has the 7 stars? The 7 stars being, it says, the angels of the 7 churches. He has them in his hand. Who controls them?
Jesus does. And he walks in their midst, it says.
Walks in the midst of the lampstands. So Christ here reserves the right to judge how he deals with and who he deals with in the 7 churches. The number is 7, not 1, so there's no unity here in the sense we would understand it.
There are 7 independent churches, and they receive independent judgment from him. When he starts to lay out, this is what I have to say about you, and then he identifies the church. He doesn't say the same thing. It's not like one letter to all of them from me, because you're the org. No. It's 7 individual churches with their own characteristics, with their own weaknesses and strengths, and he identifies them.
So the operative number in the whole book is 7, as we all know, even as witnesses. We know that's the prominent number in the book. And it starts with the 7 churches here. And Christ deals with them individually, just as he's always dealt with men in the past in both testaments. Generally individually. So we'll dive in the deep end with the 7 churches next time, because I don't think there's been a richer study in correcting the misapprehension we brought away from our life in Jehovah's Witnesses. If it's not this religion that's God's organization, then it must be one of those others out there, or none. And this, I think, you can definitely say cured us of that quest for the pure church. There is
Perfect church, yeah.
So next time we'll go into chapters 2 and 3.